There's a moment when you walk into a room and everything shifts. Conversations pause, eyes turn. The energy recalibrates around your presence, not because you announced yourself, not because you demanded attention, but because something invisible preceded you. Something that whispers danger without threat, authority without arrogance, control without force. Most people spend their entire lives trying to be noticed. They speak louder, dress flashier, perform harder. But Niccolo Machiavelli understood something far more sinister. True power doesn't announce itself. It positions itself. It doesn't chase respect. It creates the conditions where respect becomes inevitable. In a world obsessed with visibility, the invisible hold all the cards. They move through social dynamics like ghosts with gravity, shifting outcomes without fingerprints, commanding rooms through presence alone. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how they do it. 5 tactics that Machiavelli would deploy if he walked among us. Not the textbook theories, not the academic interpretations, but the raw psychological warfare that turns ordinary people into untouchable forces. Because when you master invisible power, you don't just enter rooms, you own them. But first, let me tell you why this matters more now than ever. We live in an age where everyone's fighting for the same thing: attention, influence, recognition. Social media feeds overflow with people desperate to be seen, to be heard, to matter. The noise is deafening. The competition is brutal. And in this chaos, most people are playing the wrong game entirely. They think power comes from being the loudest voice in the room. They believe influence stems from having the most followers, the biggest platform, the most impressive credentials. But Machiavelli would laugh at this amateur hour approach. Because while everyone else is screaming into the void, the truly powerful are operating from the shadows, pulling strings no one even knows exist. Think about the most influential people you've encountered in your life. Not the celebrities, not the social media stars, but the people who actually shaped your decisions, your opportunities, your path. I guarantee they weren't the ones making the most noise. They were the ones who understood something fundamental about human psychology. People don't follow those who beg for leadership. They follow those who make leadership look effortless. This is about becoming that person. The one whose silence carries more weight than others' speeches. The one whose approval becomes currency because it's so rarely given. The one who doesn't need to prove their worth because their very presence proves it for them. Now, before we dive into these 5 tactics, understand this. What I'm about to share isn't about manipulation for its own sake. It's about strategic positioning in a world where positioning determines everything. Your career trajectory, your relationships, your ability to create the life you actually want. These aren't tricks. They're principles that govern how power actually flows between human beings. The first tactic is what I call the strategic void. While everyone else fills every silence with words, every pause with explanation, every moment with their opinion, you become the black hole that draws all energy toward itself, not through emptiness, but through intentional restraint. Most people fear silence. They interpret it as awkwardness, as failure to contribute, as social death. So they fill it with noise, meaningless chatter, nervous laughter, over-explanation of simple points. They hand their power away word by word, revealing their insecurities, their desperation to be accepted, their fear of being overlooked. But silence, when wielded correctly, becomes a weapon. It forces others to fill the void. And when they do, they reveal everything: their motivations, their weaknesses, their true positions. They start talking to convince themselves as much as you. They begin justifying decisions they hadn't even made yet. They expose the gaps in their logic, the cracks in their confidence. Here's how it works in practice. Someone makes a statement looking for validation or agreement. Instead of rushing to respond, you pause. You let the statement hang in the air. You might nod slightly, showing you heard them, but you don't immediately react. The discomfort builds. They start elaborating, explaining what they really meant, adding qualifiers they hadn't planned to include. In that elaboration, they give you everything. Information they didn't intend to share, emotions they meant to keep hidden, leverage they didn't realize they were surrendering. And you gained it all without saying a word. This isn't about being rude or dismissive. It's about understanding that your attention is valuable, and valuable things shouldn't be given away cheaply. When you respond to everything immediately, you train people to expect your reaction. When you respond selectively, deliberately, you train them to value it. The second tactic builds on this foundation. It's called calculated inconsistency. Predictable people become forgettable people. When others can map your responses, anticipate your reactions, forecast your behavior, they stop watching you carefully. You become background noise in their strategic calculations. But inconsistency, when applied with precision, creates a different dynamic entirely. Not chaos, not randomness, but strategic unpredictability that keeps others perpetually off balance. Sometimes you're warm, sometimes distant. Sometimes you engage deeply. Sometimes you observe from the periphery. Sometimes you share insights freely. Sometimes you keep your knowledge close. This isn't mood swings or emotional instability. It's conscious variation designed to prevent others from developing a complete read on you. Because the moment someone thinks they have you figured out, they start taking you for granted. They begin assuming your support, expecting your resources, counting on your predictable responses to their predictable provocations. Calculated inconsistency shatters these assumptions. It forces others to pay closer attention, to study your patterns more carefully, to approach you with more caution and respect. They can't game what they can't predict. They can't manipulate what they can't map. In meetings, sometimes you're the first to speak, sometimes the last, sometimes you don't speak at all. In social situations, sometimes you're the center of attention, sometimes you're the observer taking mental notes. In conflicts, sometimes you engage directly, sometimes you let others exhaust themselves while you remain untouchable. This variation creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. When rewards come at unpredictable intervals, they become more powerful, more sought after, more valuable. Your attention, your approval, your engagement becomes something others crave because they never know when it might be withdrawn. The third tactic is perhaps the most counterintuitive. It's the art of productive opposition. Most people avoid conflict like poison. They nod along, agree publicly, keep their contrarian thoughts private. They believe harmony equals influence, that being liked leads to being respected. Machiavelli knew better. He understood that respectful opposition, delivered with skill and timing, creates more influence than 1,000 agreements ever could. Because when you disagree intelligently, you force others to defend their positions. When they defend, they reveal the strength or weakness of their reasoning. When that reasoning proves weak, they begin looking to you for better alternatives. But this isn't about being contrarian for its own sake. It's about becoming the person others turn to when they need their thinking challenged, their blind spots exposed, their strategies stress-tested. You become valuable not because you always agree, but because your disagreement makes their final decisions stronger. The key is in the delivery. You don't attack their ideas, you examine them. You don't dismiss their logic, you test its boundaries. You ask questions that force them to think deeper. Consider variables they missed. Acknowledge assumptions they hadn't examined. When done correctly, productive opposition positions you as someone who cares more about finding truth than maintaining comfort. Others begin seeking your perspective precisely because they know you won't simply validate what they want to hear. Your opinion gains weight because it's earned through genuine analysis, not given away through social courtesy. This creates a fascinating dynamic. While others compete to be the most agreeable person in the room, you become the most necessary. They need your challenge to refine their thinking. They need your questions to identify their weaknesses. They need your skepticism to prepare for real opposition. The fourth tactic operates on an even deeper level of psychological influence. I call it selective scarcity. In a world where everyone's fighting to be seen, heard, validated at every moment, you become the exception. Not absent, not unavailable, but precisely calibrated in your presence. Think about the people who command the most respect in any environment. They're not the ones who show up to everything, comment on every discussion, insert themselves into every conversation. They're the ones whose appearance means something significant is happening. When they speak, rooms quiet. When they leave, energy shifts. When they return, attention gravitates. This isn't about playing hard to get or manufactured exclusivity. It's about understanding that attention is finite, and when you spread yours too thin, it loses all impact. Every time you respond to trivial matters with the same energy you give to crucial ones, you dilute your influence. Every time you make yourself available for meaningless interactions, you devalue your meaningful ones. Selective scarcity means your presence becomes an event. Not because you're arrogant or aloof, but because when you do engage, it matters. Your insights cut deeper because you've observed longer. Your contributions carry weight because you don't waste them on surface-level discussions. Your approval means something because it's not handed out like participation trophies. This creates a psychological phenomenon Machiavelli would have exploited ruthlessly. When people can't take your attention for granted, they start competing for it. They elevate their own contributions, hoping to earn your engagement. They pay closer attention to their words, their behavior, their positioning when you're present. You become the standard by which others measure their performance, not because you demanded it, but because your selective attention creates natural hierarchy. Those who earn your focus feel elevated. Those who don't begin wondering what they need to change to capture it. In practical terms, this means choosing your battles with surgical precision. Not every slight deserves your response. Not every invitation requires your presence. Not every conversation needs your input. You become someone who appears when it matters, speaks when it counts, engages when the stakes justify your energy. The fifth and most dangerous tactic is what I call emotional immunity. While others react to every provocation, respond to every slight, defend against every criticism, you operate from a place of unshakable internal stability. Not because you don't feel emotions, but because you've mastered the art of choosing which emotions to display and when. This is perhaps the most difficult skill to develop, because it goes against every social conditioning we've received. We're taught that emotional transparency equals authenticity, that immediate reactions prove sincerity, that defensive responses show we care about our reputation. But Machiavelli understood something profound about human psychology. The person who cannot be emotionally manipulated cannot be controlled. When others realize their words can't make you angry, their criticism can't make you defensive, their praise can't make you dependent, they lose their primary tools of influence over you. Emotional immunity doesn't mean becoming a robot. It means developing such strong internal calibration that external events can't destabilize your core. When someone insults you, instead of reacting with hurt or anger, you observe the insult. What does it reveal about their emotional state? What pressure are they under that caused them to lash out? What weakness are they trying to mask with aggression? This shift from reaction to observation transforms every interaction. You're no longer a participant in their emotional drama. You're an analyst studying human behavior. And analysts don't get triggered by their subjects. They gather data. When you achieve emotional immunity, something remarkable happens. Others begin projecting strength onto your stillness. They interpret your lack of reaction as confidence. They read your calm as power. They assume your silence contains wisdom they're not sophisticated enough to understand. This projection works in your favor because people naturally defer to those they perceive as more emotionally mature, more psychologically stable, more internally secure. Your refusal to be baited into emotional reactions signals that you operate from a different level of consciousness than those around you. But here's where it gets truly Machiavellian. When you can't be emotionally manipulated, you become capable of reading others' emotional manipulations clearly. You see through their tactics because you're not caught up in defending against them. You recognize their patterns because you're not distracted by your own reactions. This clarity gives you enormous strategic advantage. While they're trying to trigger you, you're studying their triggers. While they're attempting to destabilize you, you're mapping their instabilities. While they're focused on making you react, you're learning exactly how to make them react when necessary. The combination of these 5 tactics creates something unprecedented in social dynamics. You become a force that operates by different rules than everyone else in the room. Not because you're better than them, but because you understand something they haven't yet grasped. Power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself so completely that dominance becomes unnecessary. When you deploy strategic silence, others fill the void with revelation. When you maintain calculated inconsistency, they can't predict or manipulate your responses. When you practice productive opposition, they come to depend on your perspective. When you exercise selective scarcity, your presence becomes valuable currency. When you achieve emotional immunity, their standard tactics become ineffective against you. But mastering these tactics requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands a fundamental shift in how you see yourself in relation to others. Most people enter rooms hoping to be accepted, trying to fit in, working to be liked. You enter rooms as a complete entity, neither seeking validation nor fearing rejection. This shift in internal posture changes everything about how you interact with the world. You're not performing for approval. You're not defending against criticism. You're not competing for attention. You're simply present, observing, calculating, responding only when it serves your larger objectives. This is the true essence of invisible power. Not the kind that announces itself with grand gestures or demands recognition through force, but the kind that reshapes reality through presence alone. When you master these 5 tactics, you don't just control rooms. You become the gravitational center around which all other forces must orient themselves. But understand this clearly. These aren't techniques you deploy once and forget. They're disciplines you cultivate daily until they become your natural operating system. Every conversation becomes practice. Every interaction becomes refinement. Every room you enter becomes a laboratory for honing your invisible influence. The strategic void must become second nature. You'll catch yourself about to fill silence with meaningless words, and you'll pause instead. You'll feel the urge to explain yourself, and you'll choose mystery over clarity. You'll sense others waiting for your reaction, and you'll give them something more valuable than they expected. The weight of your consideration. Calculated inconsistency requires constant awareness. You'll monitor your patterns, ensuring you don't become predictable, even in your unpredictability. Sometimes you'll arrive early, sometimes precisely on time, sometimes fashionably late. Sometimes you'll engage immediately. Sometimes you'll observe first. Sometimes you'll agree. Sometimes you'll challenge. Sometimes you'll simply absorb without revealing your position. Productive opposition demands intellectual courage. You'll need to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. Ask questions even when they're inconvenient. Challenge assumptions even when they're popular. But you'll do it with such precision and respect that others thank you for the discomfort because it leads them to better decisions. Selective scarcity requires ruthless prioritization. You'll say no to invitations that don't align with your objectives. You'll skip conversations that drain your energy without adding value. You'll disappear from situations where your presence has become expected rather than appreciated. And you'll reappear exactly when your absence has been felt. Emotional immunity is perhaps the most demanding discipline because it goes against every conditioning you've received about how to be human in social spaces. You'll feel anger and choose stillness. You'll experience hurt and display curiosity. You'll sense manipulation and respond with analysis rather than reaction. The transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it happens unmistakably. You'll notice others treating you differently before you fully realize you've changed. They'll speak more carefully around you. They'll seek your opinion on matters they used to decide independently. They'll adjust their behavior when you enter spaces, not out of fear, but out of respect for something they can't quite name. You'll find yourself invited to conversations you weren't part of before. People will share information they typically keep guarded. They'll ask for your perspective on decisions that don't directly involve you. Why? Because you've become someone whose judgment they trust, whose discretion they value, whose presence adds weight to any situation. This is how kingdoms were built in Machiavelli's time, and it's how empires are constructed today. Not through conquest, but through the gradual accumulation of influence that others freely give because they've learned to value what you represent. You don't take power. You become the kind of person to whom power naturally flows. But with this influence comes responsibility. The same tactics that can elevate you can also isolate you if wielded without wisdom. The goal isn't to manipulate others for personal gain, but to develop such mastery over yourself that you naturally inspire others to elevate their own standards. You become the person they aspire to be, not the person they fear to cross. When you walk into rooms now, something precedes you that wasn't there before. Not arrogance, not intimidation, but certainty. The certainty of someone who knows their value without needing to prove it, who understands their power without needing to display it, who commands respect without demanding it. This is Machiavelli's ultimate lesson translated for our time. True power isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself so completely that others naturally align with your vision, your standards, your way of being in the world. You don't conquer rooms, you elevate them. You don't dominate conversations, you refine them. You don't demand attention, you deserve it. The invisible power you now possess will serve you in every aspect of life. In professional settings, you'll find opportunities gravitating toward you. In personal relationships, you'll attract people who appreciate depth over surface performance. In conflicts, you'll resolve tensions others can't even address because you operate from a place of clarity they haven't accessed. But remember this above all else: power without purpose becomes corruption. Influence without integrity becomes manipulation. Control without compassion becomes tyranny. Use these tactics not to diminish others, but to create spaces where everyone can operate at their highest level, because the truly powerful don't need subjects. They inspire equals. They don't collect followers. They develop leaders. They don't create dependency. They foster growth. This is the difference between Machiavellian wisdom and Machiavellian manipulation. One builds empires that last. The other builds houses of cards that eventually collapse. You now have the blueprint. The question isn't whether these tactics work. The question is whether you have the discipline to apply them consistently and the wisdom to apply them responsibly. Because invisible power, once developed, cannot be undeveloped. It becomes part of who you are, how you move through the world, how others experience your presence. Welcome to the inner circle of those who understand that the greatest victories are won before the battle begins, that the most powerful moves are made in silence, and that true authority never needs to announce itself because it's already felt by everyone in the room. The transformation starts now, not with grand declarations or dramatic changes, but with the next conversation you have, the next room you enter, the next moment when you choose restraint over reaction, observation over participation, presence over performance. Master yourself, and you master everything that follows.